on welcome to the last and the sixth evening on the sixth chapter of the Bodhisattva Charyavatara. Glad that you're all here. So tonight we're going to continue with the verses that speak about how we can be with the sufferings of samsara, how we can learn to bear them, what kind of mental attitude we can develop so that we do not constantly create aversion or distraction from it when they occur. Having seen yesterday that the causes for suffering and the occurrences of suffering and samsara are much more than the occurrences of pleasant feelings or happy events. So if we can bear that suffering, you know, the mind will become much more peaceful and open and therefore feeling happy and free. So we're going to see tonight what Shantideva has to say more about that. But before we do that, we do a meditation, a shamatha meditation, to let the mind calm down, to let the mind settle, to let the mind rest. Because when the mind settles down, we can open the mind. And listen more, with more clarity, with more concentration, with more attention. And so when we let the mind settle down, when we meditate, because we are human beings that like to do things, right? We're all the time doing. What do I need to do? You know, doing things make us feel good. But in meditation, we actually want to step back from that doing. We just let things occur or happen in the mind as they happen. So to let the mind settle down, we actually should step back from the doing. We don't have to do anything to let the mind settle down, except stop interfering with it. Stop thinking that we need to engage in certain activities to make it happen. So try to apply that when we do the meditation. And then take your time to find a posture that is suitable for the meditation. And when you are finding that posture, the mind is focused on the body. And the mind scans through the body, checking the posture in the different places. And we do that with a mind that is gentle, patient, and kind. And when you have scanned through your body and you feel that your body is in a posture where you feel that your muscles are relaxing, where you feel that your energy can move, you stay with your mind, with the body. And if your mind is very active, you allow the mind to move through the body. And you can check on the different places if there is still some tension that needs to be released. And when you feel that your mind has settled down enough so that you can focus on one object, on one place in the body, without giving too much pressure or focus to the mind, then you let your mind rest on your breath, either by observing the rising and falling of your abdomen, or by observing the sensations at your nostrils. We let the mind rest on the breath, and at the same time, there is an alertness in the mind that is constantly checking whether or not the mind is still resting on the breath. And when we practice shamatha meditation, we train these two aspects. One aspect is resting on the object, which is mindfulness. And one aspect of mind is checking where the mindfulness is still resting on its object, and that is alertness. So we cannot focus on both aspects at the same time. And the mind alternates between the two of them. So you, for instance, start with letting the mind rest on the movements of the breath or the cessations of the breath. And then at a certain point, you can have the feeling that you're losing clarity, you're losing sharpness. Then you switch and you are focused on the alertness, checking your mindfulness. And then at a certain point, the mind becomes a little bit too tense. And maybe it gets even distracted from the object. So then you bring your mind back to the mindfulness, let your mind rest on the object. So you keep alternating between the two of them. Identifying with that aspect that is most needed in your meditation. And when your mind wanders off, away from the present moment, away from your body and from your breath, gently bring it back to the here and now, to your body. And then we can set up a good motivation for being here tonight, for doing this session. And we do that with the knowledge that the motivation is the main aspect that determines the result of our actions. And the most powerful motivation to do any action. And powerful means creating the most merit. The most powerful motivation is the Bodhichitta motivation. It is powerful because instead of one sentient beings, ourselves, we generate a mind that wishes to benefit all sentient beings without exception. And when we can sincerely generate that, instead of receiving the merit of having done an action in relation to one sentient being, we receive with that same action the merit in relation to all sentient beings, numberless sentient beings. Countless sentient beings. So you can imagine that that merit explodes. Working for the benefit of all sentient beings makes the mind very vast. We are not interested in just our own benefit. But we are interested in the benefit of all. And then the Bodhichitta motivation is also very powerful because it is very long distance, as far as we can go. And focusing the mind on enlightenment. We do not only let go of that self-cherishing mind that is only interested in the happiness of this moment or this life. We go even further to future lives. We go even further than liberation. And enlightenment is the state in which we have developed all our positive qualities. We have developed our wisdom and compassion to its utmost extent. Imagine what it is. Besides the wisdom and compassion, we have skillful means. which is a wisdom that knows when to apply that wisdom and compassion and how to apply it. And when we can develop that mind that has developed its full potential for wisdom and compassion, we can imagine that each and every sentient being in front of us, actions that we do in relation to that sentient being are only going to be of benefit to that sentient being. We give our very best to each and every sentient being. So take a couple of minutes to generate that motivation in your mind. That wishes to attain the state of full enlightenment in order to be of greatest benefit to all sentient beings. So yesterday we started to speak about verse 12, which is the beginning of the section where Shantideva speaks about the sufferings of samsara and developing the patience to bear that suffering. The sufferings of samsara is not something that we can get away from, right? No matter what we're doing, it's always there. If we think I'm going to turn left here so that I don't have to go into the traffic jam, left might be something else that is going to cause obstacles, right? And so suffering is there, obstacles are there, and then we have a kind of a choice, if we know how to be with this unpleasantness of samsara, with these situations or experiences that we do not like, that we do not wish, that if we are not aware, we constantly try to somehow change them or override them. If we somehow can be with them without being reactive. You know, that doesn't mean that they are going to go away, but it means that our mind doesn't react to them. And if the mind doesn't react to them, the mind is peaceful. And when there is real peace in the mind, there is also joy in the mind. There is also happiness in the mind. Right? So if we are looking for joy and happiness, then we need to find a way that we stop being frustrated with the suffering that arises. We need to find a way that we do not immediately have an aversion towards suffering when it arises. And so that requires a change of attitude, or maybe a change of perspective. How can we look at the situation in a different way so that that reaction of aversion doesn't occur? Right? If you just imagine that that reaction is not there. Sometimes I think the moment that we do not react to suffering anymore, it is not suffering anymore, right? Because the definition of, if we talk about suffering, we always talk about unpleasant feelings. Maybe the unpleasant feelings are still there, I'm not sure. We have to check. But if we don't react anymore to them, at least that reaction that disturbs the mind is not there. Right? We'll have more space in our mind.
When you say reaction, you mean internal reaction?
Internal action, yes. And the external action that comes from that.
Yeah, it's so difficult to control the internal.
It is difficult to
controlling. It's not about.
It is not about controlling. It is not about saying, oh, there's my aversion, I should stop my aversion. Not that kind of controlling. But controlling in the sense that we can see that our reaction of aversion is, we can somehow change our perspective so that instead of something not liking it, we can somehow embrace it. Right? If I can say when some suffering comes, oh, what an opportunity for practice. And I can say that sincerely with a happy mind, like, oh, fantastic. My aversion is gone. Right? That we can do. So we cannot stop the aversion by eliminating it, because in order to do that, we need to realize emptiness. But we can transform that aversion into something else, into maybe seeing positive aspects of suffering, and then feeling that, oh, I want to engage in that. True. Okay. So that is the attitude that we transform, from a negative attitude into a positive attitude. And so one way of doing that is that we contemplate on suffering, and we contemplate on the nature of the mind, and we contemplate on the nature of life. And all these contemplations give us a lot of reasoning that when it arises, when we are meditating on them and we really learn them, maybe first by heart, then we meditate on them. And then when the situation occurs, they pop up in the mind. Then the reasoning is there. Then the reasoning will calm down the reaction, or the reasoning will control the reaction. When the reasoning is there and you see there is no use in reacting, we disempower that reactiveness. Right? True, Ishant? Mm. Just let me have a look. What is there? The unpleasant feeling comes when the mind is not polite. I'm not sure what that means. No? In Buddhism, we say unpleasant feelings arise due to the ripening of negative karma. Unpleasant feelings can also, we can keep engaging with them with our aversion, right? If we don't like these unpleasant feelings and we try to push them away, and we have all kinds of thinking arising, negative thinking, then these unpleasant feelings keep getting triggered. Yeah, maybe if that's not clear, Opan, you can clarify it a little bit, your question. So let's go to verse number 14, which says, there is nothing whatsoever that is not made easier through acquaintance. So through becoming acquainted with small harms, I should learn to patiently accept greater harms. And so here Shantideva is talking about one of the aspects of the mind, which is that the mind can get used to anything, right? If we train the mind into something, if we create a habit of contemplating in a certain way, then the mind will start doing this. The mind becomes familiar with this, and it becomes easy for the mind to go there. At the moment when we meditate, for instance, we are very habituated to being distracted. The mind is distracted all the time. Then we start meditating, we bring the mind back, we bring the mind back. And at a certain point, the mind starts to calm down. And when we train further and further, that the mind becomes really concentrated, then we do not know anymore how to be distracted, right? Then we can try to be distracted, but we don't know how to do that anymore. Wouldn't that be funny? And the same thing with patience, for instance, when we have the habit to react strongly to adversities, and we become easily frustrated and angry. And then we start doing this mind training. At a certain point, anger doesn't arise anymore. Even if we try, we don't know how to do it anymore. Where is it, you know? I know that it was there before, but it's not coming anymore. This can be done. Sorry? You miss the anger? Would you miss the anger? Like a good friend who's not there anymore? Would you really miss the anger? You're just joking, right? Good. I think we're trying so hard to create a peaceful mind. And then we get a little bit to that, and then we're going to miss that what was disturbing the mind. That would be funny. No, I think the moment that we can take some distance from the anger, we can see that although it appears as a friend who is going to protect us when it arises, you know, the moment that we take some distance, we can see, oh my gosh, what kind of friend was that? You know, he would just come and always make such a mess in my house. Right now, everything stays more calm and relaxed. And when we are calm and relaxed, there is so much more space to think clearly. There is so much more space for your wisdom and for your compassion to arise in the mind. And so then we are much more skillful in a difficult situation. Right? But the mind can get used to anything. And so we use that through the whole path in Buddhism, right? Because we are where we are right now, with all our delusions, with all our shortcomings, with all our beliefs that are not in accordance with reality. If the mind would not have the capacity to get used to different ways of thinking and different ways of doing, Buddhism would be a very depressive religion or philosophy to practice, right? You think about the suffering and the suffering and the suffering, but there's actually nothing to do about it. It is because the mind habituates to whatever we train it in. There is this perspective that we can change our attitudes. And so we can change the amount of suffering that we experience. We can even become totally free of suffering. Right? That is because the mind can get used to anything. And we know that, you know, if we look into our daily life, if we hear something for the first time, for instance, I go to the doctor and the doctor tells me you have cancer. You're going to die within 2 months. You know, I'm shocked. The whole week, my mind is completely crazy. Oh my gosh, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die. Then at a certain point, the mind starts to calm down. And you get used to the idea that you're going to die soon, maybe sooner than you thought. Then at a certain point, you can come to the point that you feel, yeah, that is just my reality. You know? It's actually all our reality. Just most of us do not realize it. But when you're sick, you need to sit with that, you know, with that truth. You are going to die. And you even have a time with that. But the mind gets used to that. When we move to a new place, you know, in the beginning, you cannot find anything. Oh my gosh, everything is chaos in the mind. You look for how do I need to travel? Where do I find this? Where do I find that? But then after time, the mind gets used to where it is. The mind gets used to which road to take. The mind gets used to where to find everything. And then the mind calms down. Right? If I have, so I'll take something personally. So when I was younger, I had these principles, right? I hold on to my principles. Somebody recognizes that. And you feel like my principles is who I truly am, you know. So if I'm going to give that up, then who am I, you know? Then everything is really, I just chuck it all out. And so at a certain point in my life as a nun, I hit somewhere that I felt like I have to give them up. And I was so disappointed in myself that I had to do that. But I somehow then also contemplated, well, so rigidly holding on to principles, also I don't think that is part of Buddhism, right? So I gave it a chance to loosen that up. And the moment that I did that, you know, then in the beginning it was a little bit difficult, and then it became easier and easier and easier. And now I think principles, what principles, you know? It makes the mind so tight and so rigid. And it is as if you create a framework in your mind that is so solid and has only one direction, you know. I don't think the Buddha has that in the mind. I think the Buddha has a very open mind and applies whatever principle is the most beneficial in each and every situation. Right? So I can say, I'm not going to kill, for instance. That is my principle. I will never, ever, ever, ever kill. But even the Buddha didn't hold on to, I'm not going to kill in each and every situation. Right? There was a situation that the Buddha decided, now I am going to kill that person, because by doing that, I will save 500 lives. Right? So then that principle, the Buddha let go of that. With the knowledge, I will experience some negativity from that, but I'm very happy to take that on to myself. Right? So the mind can get used to it. Any more examples? Have you ever discovered how the mind can get used to something? Naveen, your mind will get used to the fact. You say, I'm never going to get used to this, right? You're saying that. I'm never going to get used to my situation. But can you see that if you would train your mind to get used to it, that it would be easier for you to live through that same situation? Right? Some things, you know, they occur in life, they are so painful and so awful and so not natural that we say, I'm never going to get used to that. And I think on a certain level, we should never make that normal. right? We can't keep saying, but this is not the normal. What is happening is not the normal. But I know that these things happen because human beings they suffer from their delusions, and they engage in actions under the influence of delusions that are not in accordance with their nature. And so they do things that are not within the normal of our human potential. So I'm not going to say that they are normal, but I am getting used to the fact that sentient beings are like that. Right? When we see the negativities that some sentient beings can create, that is sometimes so difficult to see and to accept. That human beings can do that. Right? So getting used to that doesn't mean that we accept that as normal. We just accept that some human beings are like that. And we get used to that we are living in between human beings who do that. But it's not normal. All right, that is one way that you can let go of that, right? I'm just going to look at the question. I'm very aware of the harm anger and aversion do to me. Unfortunately, as a consequence, I react with aversion towards the aversion in my mind, which makes everything much worse. Do you have some advice for that? So I'm not sure. I mean, you can have aversion for your aversion. And with that, you cancel your aversion. Right? Two negativities, two negatives that cancel each other.
Negatives, they become positive.
They become positive. So when we have two negatives, then it becomes positive. If you have aversion and you have an aversion to that aversion, you can have that aversion and say, oh no, I'm not going to go there. And you would redirect your mind to something positive, for instance. If you have aversion towards your aversion and you start beating up your aversion, that I would not do, then you make it much worse. Then you attack yourself. Then you attack an automatic reaction that you're doing under the influence of ignorance. That is like hitting a dog with a stick because the dog is barking. It's the nature of the dog to bark. And hitting the dog with a stick is not going to stop the barking. But once you see that aversion coming up, you have so many reasons why you do not want that aversion in your mind. You can redirect your mind to something else. Like when you're very addicted to something and you see that in front of you, the addiction will come up, right? Oh, I want that. So if you immediately turn your head around and do not look at it, that attachment that is about to come will just disappear, and then you can engage your mind in something else. We do that with little children too, right? If they put their mind on something and we don't want it, my mom was very strong in that. You just redirect them with something. Oh, have a look at this, and then you distract them and then they come with you and they forget about what they actually wanted to go towards. Right? We can do that with our aversion. That's no problem. Right? Can you think of something when I say that?
I think a lot of people, in order to cope with some negativities in their life, they start doing some activity, they start taking up hobbies.
They start taking
up hobbies, right?
Taking up hobbies. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so sort of they're like redirecting their attention to something else.
Yeah.
So that their mind can be engaged.
Yeah. For instance, you have a husband and you're doing something and he gets really angry and he says, I'll go to the shed and do some hobbying, right? Some carpeting or some And it's his way of not having to deal with you, not having to be with you. Well, actually, he's a little bit agitated. And then by doing his work in the shed, his agitation melts down. Right? So we distract ourselves from the anger. Is that okay, Suzanne? So see your angry mind as a with compassion. It is like we have been reacting in this way since the beginning of this time. We are not at fault that we are having these reactions, nor do we have control over these reactions. When they arise, they arise. Why then we need to manage them. And so looking at that nature that we have with compassion, this is what the lamas do. Their compassion, when we develop compassion, we have compassion, which is ordinary compassion, ordinary in the sense of we ordinary beings have that compassion. But if we dive deeper into the wisdom aspect, into the nature of reality, and we're going to contemplate the impermanent nature of reality and how impermanence works. And if we then see how we as sentient beings grasp at permanence, then we can start developing a compassion that is accompanied by the wisdom that understands impermanence. And so then we understand that although sentient beings are acting in the way they do because they hold on to permanence. Right? And so that will deepen our compassion, and we can deepen it even more to contemplate on emptiness. And then see how sentient beings and we ourselves are constantly grasping at inherent existence. And due to doing that, we are not grasping at the self, and all the suffering that occurs in dependence on that is not needed. If we would realize the self, that the self doesn't exist in the way it appears to us, that the self does not exist inherently, then there would be no suffering that arises. Right? So when we understand really emptiness, then we can look at sentient beings and we see, that the suffering they are creating for themselves is not needed. And so that will deepen our compassion even further. Yeah, so compassion for that uncontrolled mind, We do not beat it up. We do not want to suppress it. We want to understand it. And then with the wisdom mind that understands how that uncontrolled mind works. And then with reasoning, applying reasoning, that mind naturally loses its power, right? So we don't have to do anything. We just need to understand. That is the doing, but I don't feel that is really doing. At a certain point, we understand. Then the moment we really understand, it's very difficult for anger to arise. Okay, you can give that a try. Okay. So when we go to the gym for the first time after many years, oh, very tough. We can only do a few things, right? But then we go 3 times a week and we do everything what we did the previous time and a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more, right? Then the body becomes stronger and stronger. The body gets used to the exercise, and we can make the exercise stronger and stronger. Same with practicing for the mind. Any quality of mind we train in the same way. When we begin, it looks like, oh, I'm not able to manage that. I don't know how to do that. These reasonings, they don't work for me. What are they talking about? It feels so artificial. We have all kinds of complaints, right? But then if we try and we try and we try, at a certain point, we get a feeling like, hey, I still got angry, but I was over it much quicker. Or we say, well, normally I would have really started shouting, but this time I was just upset, but I didn't say anything. Or what I said was actually reasonable instead of unreasonable, right? We start seeing changes happening. And these little changes is a kind of proof that we are improving, that our patience is improving. We are still upset, but less. We are still upset, but it is quicker. The mind goes quicker to its natural state or to the rest state, right? And it's good to observe that. And then to pat ourselves on the back. Ah, it's working. Wow, I have practicing. This is the result. Fantastic. Right? When you can see that little step, you know, there is going to be another step and another step and another step. So we don't say, yeah, but I'm still getting angry and I'm still doing this. Some progress, you know. And yes, there is still work to do, but I am now encouraged to keep doing that work. And keep seeing the progress. Don't keep looking like, but there is still so much to do. We all have a lot to do, right? Don't focus, because we can get discouraged when we look how much we have to do, right? There is so much more to clean up. There is so much more to learn. If you focus too much on that, you might feel like, oh, I'm never going to be able to do that. It's not encouraging. So we have to be a little bit careful with ourselves, right? That we keep the good faith and the enthusiasm for the practice, that we keep that going. So then the next verse, verse 15. Who has not seen this to be so with trifling sufferings, such as the bites of snakes and insects, feelings of hunger and thirst, and with much minor things as rashes? And so Shantideva encourages us to look at the small sufferings of life, you know, that maybe at a certain point in life, we had really trouble with that. And we can think about when you are a little kid, you know, and you're hungry, you start screaming straight away, Mommy, I'm so hungry. I need to drink something, whatever. You're demanding because you cannot wait, you know. But then now you're an adult, we do not do that anymore, right? We can wait. And some people can wait only short time due to many causes and conditions. But then you can train the mind and the body in waiting to take food, waiting to take drinks. And if we, for instance, we do the Nunez, you know, where we do the fasting. One day we have one meal a day and we drink, and then the next day we do not eat and we do not drink. There you can see, how can I be with the suffering of not eating and not drinking? How is my mind reacting when I don't do that? When I abstain from food and drink? And so by doing the purification practice, you start noticing that if you have done a few Nunez, you know, then it becomes easier and easier to be these days without any food and any drink. Some people have trouble doing that. They have done many Nunez and they still cannot be with that. You know, maybe then it's not their practice. I don't know. We have to be careful with that. Some people have kidney problems. Some people have other problems that you should not do the Nunez constantly, you know, that because it creates too much imbalance in the body. But for the general, you know, 90%, I think, of the people, or maybe more, doing that, we can learn a lot about the mind. Right? Because in daily life, we believe I need to eat 3 times a day. And if I don't get my food, then I'm not going to be well. And if I do not get this, then I'm not going to be. And these are all kinds of beliefs that we have built up in dependence on experiences at a certain time in life. But causes and conditions in life change. And who says it's still like that today? And maybe when we train, you can bear the hunger, you can bear the thirst. right? You can try and see what happens. I think it's a beautiful way to train the mind, but also to see that potential of the mind, you know, because we believe, oh no, I cannot be without food and drink. And then you do it and you think, oh, what's the problem? You know, I can easily be without food for that long. Sometimes we even feel much better without it than with it. So we start with little things and then we get used to them. And then slowly, slowly, we can build up. We can take on a little bit more suffering. So Shantideva says in verse 16, I should not be impatient with heat and cold, wind and rain, sickness, bondage and beatings. For if I am, the harm they cause me will increase. And so that is really true, no? It's like we do undergo heat and cold and wind and rain at certain points in time. And that can be very unpleasant. But then we have to check how the mind reacts. We cannot change that experience of unpleasantness, but we can see how the mind reacts. And so when I already experience suffering and the mind becomes upset or angry, we add to our own suffering. Deeply emotionally, we believe I'm going to relieve myself from suffering when I do that. But in actuality, we add to the suffering. And so when we get angry, when we get angry, that is already a sign that we are suffering. So then when we get angry at ourselves for being angry, we add to the suffering. Right? The moment that we realize angry people are already suffering a lot. When I'm angry, I'm actually suffering. It's a sign of suffering. And so when you fight yourself in an outburst of anger, look at your suffering. Don't think, oh, I'm angry, I'm so bad. Look at your suffering and say, what am I actually suffering from that I'm getting so angry? And then try to feel compassion for yourself within that suffering. We are at verse 16. Oh, thank you, Margaret. So whatever suffering that we are going through, also when we are sick, you know, being sick is not easy. Being sick for a week, okay. But some people are sick for a long period of time. Some people are in pain for a long period of time. That is suffering. That is something they need to carry with them, you know, and when it happens to us, then to be with ourselves, with the patient mind, with a loving mind, with a compassionate mind is not easy, because we maybe had different expectations of life, right? We maybe had all kinds of ideas what we want to do with life. And now here we are just sick, we are on our back, we cannot do anything. Right? How horrible. My life has become completely meaningless. I had so many plans. I wanted to do so many things. And the mind keeps going and going, you know, which are all signs that we cannot accept what life is bringing us. And maybe we even say, yeah, I'm definitely not going to accept that. You know, I'm still young. I still have so much energy. I have so many plans. I'm not going to accept that I'm sick. But can you see that you're creating a problem when you do that? That fighting against what is not helping you to get over it. Sometimes we say that you need to fight, right? The way we fight is very important. It is not a fight against what is happening, right? If life brings us sickness and I'm going to fight being sick, I am going to fight me because I'm sick. It's not going to help. Right? Because I beat myself up. And when I beat myself up, I have even less energy to heal. I can think, what do I need to do to heal from this sickness? You can put your energy in that. In that way, you can try to overcome your sickness. Not by not accepting that you're sick. And so in order to heal, you first need to accept that you're sick. And that is a very difficult part. Because then we feel that, oh, but when I accept that I'm sick, I cannot really heal. You know, I'm going to be sick forever. When in actuality, when we can truly accept what is happening to us, we can get to that place where we look at a situation and at ourselves with loving kindness and compassion, and then somehow create a space in which healing can take place. Can you see that? So there is a question, what can we do to ease the suffering of a friend who's going through a tough time? So when we are experiencing the suffering of samsara, what heals is compassion. Compassion is the wish for the other person or for yourself to be free of that suffering. And so if a friend is sick or going through a tough time, they need someone who can be there in that suffering. Be with that person in the suffering. And so that person can express whatever they need to express. They can feel whatever they are feeling. Without having, you know, so that is the best way for them to heal and to feel that they are supported and to give them some ease from their suffering. What happens often is that our friend is suffering and the suffering is so intense, we cannot bear it. And they start talking and it makes us so unpleasant. We cannot feel with them. And then we shut down, you know, or we run away, or we stop the conversation because it's too much to bear. And so that means that we are lacking compassion in order to be with that particular friend in that suffering, right? But if we deepen our compassion, we get used to the suffering. And I think this is beautiful in getting used to the sufferings of samsara. The better we understand the sufferings of samsara and we know how to be with them, then when we see somebody else experiencing these sufferings, we can be with that person with our capacity to be in the suffering, with the suffering. And that person then will feel, wow, she understands me. Wow, she really cares about me. She's here with me. When you can express your suffering and somebody really hears you, your suffering is already much less. True? When we go to a doctor with a problem, you know, and the doctor sits there and immediately starts writing the recipe here. Nothing, you know, but when you have a doctor and the doctor says, oh, really, you know, can you tell me a little bit, how does it feel like? And he really listens to you. When you leave that place, you feel already much better. Right? And they have actually done scientific research for this. What gives relief to the suffering when people go to the doctor? And it is the listening attitude of the doctor that gives the biggest relief, not the medicine. The doctor who gives the medicine with compassion, knowing this is really going to help you. And that really going to help you comes from a place, I understand where your sickness is coming from. These people have most benefit. They experience most benefit from going to the doctor. Does that help? Okay. Okay, next verse, it's verse 17. Some, when they see their own blood, become especially brave and steady, but some, when they see the blood of others, faint and fall unconscious. And so Shantideva tries to give you, or gives you an example of two kinds of people. You know, some see their own blood, and when they see their blood, they become even stronger. You know, they become more brave when they see their own blood. While others, when they see the blood of others, you know, they're going to faint, like they cannot even cope with the blood of others, let alone the blood of themselves. And so he says that the difference in how we react to a situation where we experience suffering comes from conditioning and from constant familiarity. Conditioning we can see, for instance, the Native Americans, I hope I give a good example. There is a, oh, thank you very much. There is, they need to do certain, I think when they cut themselves and they have scars, you know, that is a sign of bravery, right? Wow, they have many scars. Look what they went through, right? They guys have some esteem. When we have scars, we go to the doctor to let them disappear, right? We don't want anyone to see the scars because they're so ugly. We want to hide them. So that is a conditioning, right? If we are appreciated, for instance, for all the wrinkles that we develop when we're getting older, right? And there is a kind, we're living in a society where society looks upon the wrinkles as something precious that we are getting. We will suffer much less from old age than when we live in a country where we have to go for facelifts and whatever in order to keep looking young, right? That is conditioning. So the way we suffer from something, part of that comes from conditioning. Part of that comes from how society, how we ourselves think about that suffering. If it is seen as something fantastic, you know, then it's not so much suffering. If it is seen as something ugly that should be removed, oh, then we suffer a lot when it happens. True? Same thing, but how we look at it determines how much we suffer. So that is conditioning. And then familiarity, you know, if we think about old age, you know, every day we get older one day. We become more and more, and then we look into the mirror and we see all the wrinkles coming. And first you get in a shock, and then the next day you get a little bit used to it. You get more used to it, and then more wrinkles come. You have to get used to them, right? And so slowly we get more familiarity with getting old. And with all the characteristics that come with that. If I see them and I start fighting with them, I suffer. If I see them and I can think something positive about it, right? I can see them as a beauty. They beautify my whatever. Then I do not suffer from it. Right? That is a choice that we have. And that is a way that we can train our mind. Right? Not?
Yes, yes, no. When I was in my 20s, I wanted to look like I'm in my 40s now.
When we are 20, we want to look like we are 40. And then when we're 40, we think, oh my gosh, I wish I was done. Yes. It's hard to be content with what we have. Yes. The good thing about old age is that your eyesight gets worse, so you don't see your wrinkles. That's true. but you also see many other things, not anymore. You know, when you go to the shop, see it. Okay. So becoming familiar, first with little things, little sufferings of samsara, and then taking up more, taking up more. Then verse 18, and I think we can see the benefit of being able to be with the sufferings of samsara. I do think that in order to be with the sufferings of samsara, we do need to develop our compassion, right? It deepens our compassion. The more we understand these three types of suffering that we spoke about yesterday, the suffering, the suffering of change, and the all-pervasive suffering, our compassion deepens, right? At the moment, we only have compassion for the suffering of suffering. Oh, that person is hurting, but we don't have so much compassion for the suffering of change, right? We might think, oh, how am I going to do that? Or the all-pervasive suffering. Even that is difficult to see, how we are running again and again and again in order to get something, but no matter what we are doing, we're only perpetuating our own problems, and with that, our own suffering. The better we understand that, the more our compassion deepens. And so, where did I want to go with that? And so knowing how to be with the sufferings of samsara, which are there, which we cannot stop, no matter how much comfort we try to create. You know, His Holiness says there is no end to comfort, right? We experience some discomfort, or we make something that makes you feel more comfortable. We all need to buy that, and then we discover, oh, but this is not completely good. We have still some discomfort. Oh, we come with a new machine that gives you perfect comfort. And so we keep buying. Every time more comfort. But there is no end to that. His Holiness says there is no end to that. So there will always be the suffering in samsara of experiencing discomfort. No matter is created by karma and illusions. So our body naturally will experience discomfort. That, I mean, if you don't want to experience any discomfort, you need to change that. You need to get rid of your karma and delusions so that you have a body that always experiences bliss no matter what. Then the discomfort is gone. But constantly looking for outer comfort to try to get rid of your discomfort is a never-ending story, right? So when we see that and when we realize that, and then we say, okay, you know, yes, this is not perfect. Yes, this is not, but I'm content. I'm happy. I enjoy my life, you know, with these things, you know, they're broken, they're damaged, they're not perfect, but I'm still happy. It's not determining my happiness, right? If we can be with these discomforts, our compassion will deepen. When our compassion deepens, you know, we are of so much more benefit to other sentient beings that we meet, because we understand them. We understand where they're coming from. We understand what they are experiencing. And maybe we have some tools that we can hand them over and say, try this, you know. I suffered from the same before, and this is what I did. And now I'm quite okay, you know. I know now how to be with it. I got used to it. I don't mind it anymore. And actually, I can be so happy even if it is like that, right? So that's a great benefit that we can receive from being with the sufferings of samsara. So in verse 18, Shantideva says, these reactions come from the mind, being either steady or timid. Therefore, I should disregard harms caused to me and not be affected by suffering. And so Shantideva is talking about what we can do when these feelings of discontentment and dissatisfaction arise, and how we can bring transformation about in our attitude towards, how we can change our attitude towards pain and suffering. And so our normal attitude is, I don't like it, right? I have aversion. I don't like the suffering. And so we realize what I'm suffering from is my aversion. Why do we realize that? We are not suffering so much from the suffering, but we are mainly suffering from our aversion to the suffering. It is not the feeling of suffering that disturbs the mind. It is our reaction to that feeling that disturbs the mind. And from that reaction that upsets the mind, we suffer much more than just from that experience of suffering that we have. Strange, huh, what I'm saying now? No? We have to twist our mind a little bit, right? Because we have ways of thinking. We think, oh, this is how it is. This is how... And then when we start practicing, we start making changes and we think, oh, where are they going with this? But if we keep doing that, we generate other pathways of thinking, and therefore other pathways of reacting. So our intensity, our dislike, if our intolerance is very strong, if our dislike is very strong, then we suffer even more. So the better we understand the nature of suffering, the 3 types of suffering, and there are more ways of contemplating suffering, the 6 types of suffering, the 8 types of suffering, when we think about them deeply, not in order to get depressed, not in order to get caught up and think, oh my gosh, where did I thought I was in a good realm, but look, all this suffering that is here. But we contemplate them because we are interested in it, to understand it, so that we learn how to be with it in a way that we do not need to react. To be with certain sufferings, for instance, the suffering of loneliness. How can we be with the suffering of loneliness without reacting? We need to have a lot of ideas how we can create a space for ourselves in which we feel safe and supported and loved and whatever else you need in order to experience the pain of the loneliness. If we are interested in learning that, in learning to develop the compassion to be with ourselves in these pains, your life becomes so much more easy. And so we can contemplate the nature of suffering itself. We can also contemplate that we have the possibility of changing our attitude through familiarity, and so we can reflect on the nature of phenomena, that nothing exists inherently, that everything that arises, independence of causes and conditions, changes moment to moment, that we can change causes and conditions. For instance, anger, it arises in the mind due to causes and conditions. One of the causes and the conditions is my beliefs. It is my mental engagements. It's my me thinking in a certain way that fuels that anger. I can change all that, right? I can change my way of thinking. I can change whether I'm going to engage with that anger or not. I can train my mind that I'm not going to engage with the anger anymore. I'm going to observe my anger when it arises in the mind. I'm not going to be it anymore. Right? We have these possibilities because nothing that exists inherently. And everything that arises, everything that we see is impermanent by nature. And so because it is impermanent, it can be changed. It can change. It changes already naturally, but we can also do things things that help them to change in a certain direction. True. And so when we are not intolerant anymore with suffering, right? Sometimes, I don't know, when you see suffering, you almost cannot bear it, right? And you have, sometimes you see suffering in someone and the suffering, and you cannot bear it. You have so much aversion to be with that person because you can't take it, right? We can learn to be with that suffering. So even when we see it, that we do not get overwhelmed, that we understand what is going on, that we can be present with that suffering. And then the mind is not disturbed. That's a great skill to have in samsara, right? Because we cannot get rid of the suffering. It is there all the time. And so knowing how to be with it creates patience, right? Creates a mind that is undisturbed with suffering. It's undisturbed by suffering. And so we can only train this when we understand the Buddhist path, right? What we want to do with it. If we're going to think about suffering and we're going to really look into what suffering is and how it feels like, and we need to know why are we doing this. And so we need to know the Four Noble Truths. We need to know that, yes, the nature of everything is that it is in the nature of life is that it is in the nature of suffering, or the nature of life is suffering, or life is in the nature of suffering. I'm sorry. And then why do we need to know that? Because we can only look for the cause of what we are experiencing when we acknowledge that we are experiencing something. And then when we look into the cause for suffering, we can find the cause. And the fact that we can find the cause means that we can also generate a mind that opposes that. And that means that we can therefore also be free of that suffering. And then we can say, okay, then what path do I need to go in order to achieve that? So if there is no release from suffering, if there is no possibility to become free from suffering, right? I would agree, I would just want to run away from suffering, right? I would not look into the suffering. But if I know that suffering is coming from causes and conditions, and I can actually stop the causes and conditions for suffering, then it's very interesting to look into suffering and very helpful for my own mind. Right? So we need to see that in this perspective. Otherwise, we're going to be very depressed. Oh, these Buddhists always talking about suffering. Oh my gosh, you know. And sometimes we can have the feeling that when we speak about suffering, that we have to feel the sufferings, right? Like it's a little bit maybe Christian, my own Christian background, that thought that in the beginning, I have to feel the suffering, I'm not allowed to do anything about it. But if we can do something about suffering, we should do something about suffering, right? If we are in an abusive relationship and you can walk away, you should walk away. Right? We should not understand the teachings from the Buddha that there is suffering and I should just stay there. I should let go of my reaction of aversion that tries to walk away from that. That's not what the Buddha is saying. Right? But there are sufferings that we cannot avoid. Right? And there are also situations that we cannot walk away from. Then it's very handy if we have patience. Right? So when you're in a suffering situation and you can get out, get out. Very important. And then when you're out, you know, sometimes we experience suffering. certain type of suffering. For instance, when we grow up, oh, I'm going to be free of that suffering. And then we discover very soon, oh my gosh, I'm in the same situation, just different people around me, but I experience exactly the same thing. And then maybe I run away another time. And then I end up again in the same situation, right? So then you can say, yes, it is okay to walk away. But you also, if you really want to resolve your issue, you have to look into that, because this is not going to go away by itself. And no matter how many times you run away from that, it will occur again, right? But if you start looking at it, you can make sure that you have a safe situation where that suffering is not constantly triggered, right? And where you feel that you have the conditions to work on it. Then if you have worked on it, you can give it another try and see what happens. And you can check how far you are with transforming the mind. So see the whole story about getting used to the sufferings of samsara in the right perspective, in the right context, right? Do not get into situations where, if you are in a situation where you are totally overwhelmed, get out. That is not the moment to practice anything, you know. The moment we are overwhelmed, the self-cherishing mind is right there, our own delusions get triggered. There is no space to practice, there is no wisdom in the mind, there is no space for compassion for others, even for ourselves. Just remove yourself. Then with what you have experienced, then you can reflect back later and say, what was that? You know, and you think about it and you analyze your own mind. And then you practice in accordance with what Shantideva says. Verse 19. Even when the wise are suffering, their minds remain very looted and undefiled. For when war is being waged against the disturbing conceptions, much harm is caused at the times of battle. And so what that means is that when we have developed our wisdom mind and we have become the wise ones, you know, then when unpleasant feelings arise, when suffering arises, our mind stays undefiled. We are not reactive. When we are not reactive, the mind stays very clear, very lucid, right? And we can stay happy despite the feeling, despite the fact that unpleasant feelings arise in the mind. And so Shantideva encourages, I mean, they're talking about war and waging war and times of battle. You know, that sounds to me a little bit like we have to fight with our delusions. And I'm not sure if that works. I don't know. What do you think? I prefer to think I want to become so smart and so wise and so understanding the nature of my own mind and how unpleasant feelings trigger a reaction, and that I have so many reasons to disempower that reaction. And so as soon as unpleasantness arises, that I somehow have the space and the wisdom that I say, okay, I'm just going to feel this. And I do not react to that. No need to react to that. Or when a reaction arises, that I have so much wisdom that immediately I can apply the antidote. Right? I do to Numita doesn't feel like I'm waging a war. It more feels like I'm being very, it's like a wisdom, no? It's I don't know how to say that. You're very skillful. Yes, thank you. So for me personally, I'm not so sure what to do with these words, times and battle. And
I think he's trying to say that if we fight, like against our own, like if we fight with that, let's say suffering and all, we will suffer more. I mean,
if we fight with something outside, we will suffer.
not like that. Fight with, let's say suffering.
If we fight with suffering,
So we will suffer more.
Yeah.
That is within ourselves, within our minds. That is talking within our minds.
okay, if we fight the suffering, if we fight the unpleasant feeling, if we react with aversion to the unpleasant feeling, then we will suffer more.
Yeah.
Battle of the mind.
Oh, that is true. Oh, thank you very much. I totally misunderstood that. For when war is being waged against the disturbing conceptions, much harm is caused at the times of battle. That's right. That's right. So when we wage war against the suffering, when war is being waged against the disturbing conceptions, no, I still don't get that.
Because the four is the things which are disturbing you, like the conception, like your perspective.
Yeah, but how do I wage war against that?
Or like within yourself, like you're fighting with yourself.
But it says war is waged against the disturbing conceptions.
Yeah, you're suffering. Disturbing conception is suffering, or the unpleasant emotions or whatever.
There's another translation.
Okay, maybe read the other translation, see what that says.
When sorrows fall upon the wise, their minds should be serene and undisturbed. For in their war against defiled emotion, many are the hardships, as in every battle.
Oh, that is a very different.
This is the Padma text. This is my mind.
Huh? That is, so we have different translations.
He's talking about battle.
Okay. Oh no, I wanted to look in that one, but I checked this book. So the first two lines are a little bit similar. When sorrow falls upon the wise, their mind should be serene and undisturbed. For in their war against defiled emotion, many are the hardships, as in every battle. I'm not sure what that means.
Feels like he's saying that when you're fighting your own disturbing conceptions, you're causing more harm to yourself.
When you fight your own disturbing conceptions,
Yeah, you're fighting as in you're suppressing it, right?
you're suppressing it. Your disturbing conceptions, or you're suppressing your anger,
Yeah.
your reaction to the.
Yeah, so you're harming yourself even more because in the battle nobody is.
Second translation is more confusing. The one we have seems to be more clear.
Yeah.
I think the Padmakara is more truthful in the sense that it is literally translated. This Padmakara translation, what I have heard is, it's more literal translation.
More literary translation.
Better. Because
This one is sometimes better.
yeah.
Yes. Okay. This one is from Sambala Classics. Lama Zopa, he was here last week, and he said, "Should FBMT translate Bodhisattva Charya? What do you think? What do you think?" And we said, "Yes, yes, yes," because I think if we have more translations, in Tibetan, every word has so many different connotations, and so when there is another translation, you can check. But also, when you get a translation from Lama Zopa Rinpoche, who has been meditating so deeply on this, then he might give you a completely different taste of what he says that verse means. But we have been speaking about, whatever we are fighting and where we see the battle, we know that it is not easy, that when the mind gets very upset, to do something about that, to generate a mind that can be patient in difficult situations. We need to undergo hardship for that. In order to do that, we need to battle our own beliefs, right? Our own beliefs that feel that it is very justified that we get angry. Our own beliefs that we have to get angry. If we don't get angry, who's going to protect me, right? We need to battle with these beliefs in order to develop that mind of patience, right? So we can think about that. But I'm not sure if that is exactly meant in this verse. And then I should know Tibetan and read it and meditate on it. Let me see what His Holiness said on that. So he says that when we are happening, what is happening is that we are engaged in a combat with hatred and anger. So when we practice patience and tolerance, what the reality of what we are talking, hatred and anger, that is what he says. We are battling with that. And so we are seeking victory over the anger and the hatred. And so when we try to slay or try to battle our anger and our hatred, we will undergo many hardships. It doesn't come easy. And we need to know that. And so we need to somehow develop a mind that is willing to bear these hardships. Only through bearing the hardships can we overcome our anger and our hatred, right? And then he says, and when we can do that, we are a true hero. All right. Shall we leave it there tonight? No, we haven't done 20 even. So there's still 20 and there is 21. And if I look at the notes that I have, it's about 2.5 pages. Right? If it was very short, I would say, oh yeah, okay, let's finish. And then we have done 21, because after verse 12 till 21 is all about the sufferings of samsara, right? And you wanted to finish that.
No, I just really like the way it's been. I read it and I was looking forward to it. No.
Which one is it? 20 or 21?
21.
Furthermore, suffering has good qualities.
Yes.
It's like a little summary about, so I with Kabir, you go back to verse 19, 20, right? Yeah. But this is what we have been speaking about a lot, So suffering has good qualities. The good qualities of suffering, you know what they are? Huh?
Yeah, you feel less. Ego becomes less.
The ego becomes less. Our pride becomes less. Our haughtiness becomes less. Right? We believe, oh, I can, I'm so good, I'm so great, we are above much that we maybe get even paralyzed, we cannot do anything. Then your ego has to think, oh, look at me, I thought I was so fantastic, but maybe me being fantastic is not in the way that I thought it was. Right? So the arrogance and our pride, that gets diminished when we experience suffering, right? When we go through it, but when we come out of it, and empathetic. So another aspect that another benefit from undergoing suffering is that we become more empathic. We understand suffering, we understand what other people undergo who are suffering, you know. When we see someone we know, so we won't judge, we will be able to be with that person while he is undergoing that suffering, right? Which is a great quality to have. And maybe another quality of suffering is that, you know, if we think about what is the causes of my suffering, and if we then get to the negative actions that we have done in the past, and then we reflect on the negative actions that we are doing today, and then we say, okay, if I don't want that, I should stop this, right? So it can be a help of stopping engaging in negative actions. And then the next one is that we can say, oh, but you know, I'm suffering now, but I can create the causes for happiness by engaging in virtue, engage in negative and positive actions, creating merit. Right? These are some of the benefits of undergoing suffering. And so when suffering comes, instead of saying, oh, I don't want that, if we can say, oh, what an opportunity.
Let me experience it.
Then
Let me experience it once.
let I know what it is. Welcome the suffering, you know.
If you explain words how wonderful when something comes, and I tried it and it really works. Like even if you know, it really works just to say that phrase. You know?
It really works to say when something negative happens or something unpleasant, to say, oh, how wonderful. You know, what a surprise, how interesting. How interesting. Wow, let me look into that further. Yes, if we somehow, you know, sometimes when I feel resistance, then maybe after 3-4 days, I think, or maybe you should sit with it and then do some tonglang, you know. And then I sit with it and I do visualize, I'm going to take it on. I'm going to take on that suffering. And then very soon it already is changing. And it is like, oh my gosh, what was I fighting? You know, it took me 5 days to wake up and to get the thought.
But that cannot work in every situation.
What?
But that cannot work in every situation.
It cannot work in any situation.
You know, like I said, that sometimes you have to walk out of that.
Sometimes you have to walk out of that place. Yeah. But I'm saying, no. I'm not talking about when I say that something arises, then something arises in my mind, right? Not coming from outside. And then we have, excuse me.
But then even somebody is doing wrong on someone.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about that.
Just responding to that, even if something's doing wrong to you, say how wonderful, and your view changes. And then you're able to say that, yes, now I can even draw my boundaries. Otherwise, you don't have an opportunity to draw boundaries with someone. When you say that I am not going to tolerate any kind of.
Break it down for the drawing boundaries. Can you say a bit more?
Drawing boundaries is like,
Very useful.
yeah, it's like saying that, okay, I will not take this not take it into me and not take it from this person. So you, like His Holiness, someone says that if somebody is ill-treating you, you have created the karma. Or even Lama Zopa says,
if somebody is treating us bad, we have created the karma
so we need
to undergo that experience. Yes.
So we are responsible for that karma.
Well, not just for that, we are responsible for that karma. Not only that, but we can also think, because of our karma, that person is engaging in a negative action, and that person is creating the causes to be reborn in the hell. You know, I should take care of that person. I should have compassion for that person. And I should thank him or her, because that person is helping me to purify my negative thought. Thank you so much. You know, you say to your biggest enemy. But that takes a lot of contemplation. You know, when you hear that the first time, and you really have undergone deep trauma, as you can't hear that, you know, I think you first have to maybe heal, maybe in this life, before you can go to the level of karma.
So how wonderful seems to work sometimes. Last 10 days, I mean, this one takeaway I've had from this session, that able to just step back and look at the space in between my heart, the feeling of certain kind of feeling, and the response of anger, aversion. And then there seems to be, I'm able to, at least for now, identify a small little space in between where I recognize the lack of love for myself.
Right.
And somehow I'm able to put a balm or a hug or a kiss there. And it seems to make a huge, so how wonderful seems to be very useful there. That you feel fuller with yourself. You feel every opportunity of when you feel suffering at that particular moment, when you start doing this, it feels a lot better.
Yes.
And the act of loving ourselves is only because we're suffering.
Yes.
Otherwise, you're not used to that. At least I'm not used to loving myself.
Yes.
So that was very useful.
Yes. Yes. So when we suffer, what we do is we want to disconnect from that suffering. We want to disconnect that pain. And that disconnection hurts even more, right? So when we can say something positive, if we can say how wonderful means that we are not disconnecting. How wonderful means that we are connecting with it. And then we can feel, oh, that makes it actually feel much better, right? Because we suffer from that disconnection. So every word that you can come up with that helps you to connect, you know, connection. Compassion is connecting. When we connect, pain will disappear. Pain is only, it is a symptom of disconnection. When we connect, and connecting, I mean connecting with our nature, connecting with our nature of loving kindness and compassion, right? Wherever we feel pain, there is a disconnection from that nature. So when we say, I'll take it, you know, I limit the disconnection. There is a pain, I'll take it. I'll hold it. I hold myself within that pain, but I'm not gonna disconnect from that. When I disconnect from that, I suffer even more.
I used to have strong resistance towards Jamyang meditation, and now when you put it like that,
Yes.
I used to feel this is, you know, being a martyr to exchange.
Yes. Yes. So doing Tonglang is not being a martyr, taking on the suffering. You know, you're already suffering somebody, and then you're going to take the suffering from others. So if you're already suffering a lot, you start with taking on the suffering of yourself, right? And sometimes that might be your only practice for a long time. Take on the suffering of yourself. Take on the suffering of yourself in the present moment. Take on the suffering of yourself that you have experienced in the past. Take on the suffering that you experience and you're gonna experience in the future. And then when you have some more loving kindness and compassion for yourself and more space in your heart, suffering from the ones that I love, you know, you start with that. But don't take on more than you feel that you can, right? Especially in the beginning. Especially in the beginning. All right, so we do that to change that aversion that we have for suffering into letting go of that aversion and actually doing the opposite. And with that, we eliminate 90% of the suffering at least. Right? It's extremely genius. Okay. Cognitive disabilities can cause serious disadvantages for people in life. Yes, of course, you know. What can we say? Any disability has a disadvantage, but you can also turn that around into an advantage somehow. It depends how you look at it. For instance, there is a guy in Italy, and he is he is a very, very special guy, but he is mentally has some disabilities. And so he's coming to Institute of Amazon Camp. I'm sure he's okay when I talk about that. He has some mental, but he can see his past lives. And so he talks about how he has been in the hell, because in past life he killed some Chinese, you know. And so in this life he has some leftover karma to be purified with this, which is the mental disability. But because of that mental disability, he's always happy. Always happy. He's not very smart. He's doing all the practices, but always happy, you know, not worried about anything. And he has you know, from the government, he gets money in order to live because of his disability. So he can practice his whole life, you know, without having to go out for work, right? There was a lot of advantage, you know, he can see these advantages for his own life. Very happy.
Does it mean that he's not probably accumulating any negative karmas? Because if he's happy, then he's not.
Well, when he's happy, he is also experiencing the karma from past lives.
But in this life, he's not accumulating any karmas, right? Because his intentions are not. When if you're happy, then essentially
you check as a question. If you are all the time happy, does that mean that you have therefore no wrong intentions?
Yes, sir.
I go hunting and I love hunting, right? And I'm going to shoot these animals and then I'm going to make a very nice meal, right? I feel very happy, but I can still create negativities out of attachment. When we act out of attachment, it feels like I'm very happy.
Wonderful.
That is something that's very different, you know. We need to keep separating that. Don't mush everything together because you lose the essence. You say if he's all the time happy, does that mean that he doesn't create any negative karma? And I say if you experience all the time happiness, that means that you are experiencing the results of previous karma. Then you assume that when I am happy, I don't create negativities. So you assume that I only create negativities when I feel unhappy. And I'm saying that we create negativities out of anger, but also out of attachment and also out of ignorance. So being happy is not, we cannot assume that when somebody is happy, they do not create negativities, feelings. You understand?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. How can we take on the suffering of oneself? You know, when you are suffering, when you feel shitty, when you feel, I don't know, what do we feel that is not nice? Lonely, depressed, you know. When we feel lonely, it's something to meet other people. We do all kinds of things so that we do not feel it. But if we then would sit down and acknowledge, this really hurts, you know, I feel so lonely. I can see my neediness, and I can see my tendency to go out and grasp and hold on to people and say more than that actually is needed. I can feel that I want to do that. And so then you can say, okay, how does it feel that you are lonely? And you go into that pain of loneliness, and you say, I take on that pain, and you can breathe it in, but you breathe it in with a lot of loving kindness and compassion for yourself, right? You see yourself as a human being who is experiencing loneliness. within that loneliness, while we're experiencing that loneliness, we need to create a kind of space for ourselves in which we feel loved, in which we feel supported, in which we feel fully accepted for who we are. Right? And then we say, okay, I'll feel that loneliness. And that loneliness slowly melts. Right? Then when it is experienced, it is experienced. Finished. Then we might experience another moment of loneliness and another moment of loneliness, but we can take them all on, you know? And then you become more and more comfortable with being lonely. And then it is not such a pain and not such a suffering when we feel it. Maybe the pain, I don't know, but it is definitely not such a suffering. Right? Can you see that? All right. Okay, so then we're gonna finish this evening. And Kabir will be here next week on Monday. Huh? On Monday, and on Sunday we have a session from 11 to 1 o'clock. You want to do the announcements?
Yeah.
You maybe come here.
I think I'm good.
Come here.
Weighted down by processing all this. Okay, for the Zoom. Yeah, for Zoom.
Are you in it?
Yeah, so our next session will be, aside from our daily morning meditations, which we also have, by the way, at 8 a.m. Monday through Friday on Zoom and in person. There's a separate WhatsApp group for that in case anyone's interested in joining those. And recordings are also shared. Our next teaching with Venerable is on Sunday, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. No grand lunch this time, sorry. You'll have to fend for yourselves for lunch, but yeah, that will be a open like review and opportunity to ask questions about like the readings that we've done up till now, the verses we've done. Any questions? Yeah, just 2 hours, like bring all your questions to dump. Yeah, so that's we're looking forward to that.
So there won't be any teaching on Sunday, it's more like a Q&A.
Yeah,
Well, it'll be like a teaching only because Venerable will be asking like what, yeah, but we will continue through more verses. Yeah, so we'll continue then with chapter 6 with actually reading the verses with Kabirji from Monday.
Yes.
At our regular time, 6:30.
Yes, we will not continue with the verses. We maybe redo a recap, but we're not gonna go further.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, so we can just dedicate briefly.
Okay, you can do that. So we dedicate all the merit that we have gathered, not just in this session, but we can dedicate this the merit from all these 6 sessions. And maybe I do gonna take Shantideva and read a few verses from his dedication chapter. And before I read these verses, you can visualize that all the merit that we have generated by listening and contemplating and meditating, that we gather that in the form of white light. You can gather that in your heart and rejoice in your participation, rejoice in your learning, rejoice in whatever is going to come from this. It's so precious, so precious. And so then we can visualize all sentient beings around us because we're going to dedicate the merits to their happiness and well-being. By thinking, may the blind see forms and may the deaf hear sounds. And just as it was with Maya Devi, may pregnant women give birth without any pain. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the fallen find new hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their illness, and may every disease in the world never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting one another. As long as space endures, and for as long as living beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the misery of the world. And so all that merit, we freely give that to all sentient beings for their happiness, for their well-being in this life and all future lives, until we all find the happiness of pure enlightenment. So thank you so much for being here, and I hope to see you on Sunday and that you come with loads of questions. And maybe maybe people can send the questions to you already, Nivita, or not? Yeah, so if you're on the WhatsApp group, you can also send the questions to Nivita.
I put her email in the chat so they can.
Or she put an email in the chat, and you can use that email. Oh yeah, mahayana.delhi@gmail.com. You can send your questions there. And so we then just take them here to the session and go through them. If you feel that you want to ask the question yourself, that's fine too. You know, we can, you can do that verbally. We can unmute people. So whatever you feel most comfortable with. Okay. Hope to see you then. Bye-bye.